This is just a quick heads up for these videos to let you know that I've designed them so that they can be listened to. You don't have to look at the screen. All that's going to be on screen every now and then is just some text or a diagram or two to accompany what I'm saying. I just wanted to reassure you that you don't have to watch, you can just listen. And also, I want to let you know that if the recording of this video is like too high energy, I can very easily just re-record it to be more soft-spoken if that's what you need. If you could let me know if that's what you want by just like typing T in the comments for too much, then that would be perfect. Thank you. I started to make this video series because my therapist suggested it might be a good idea. I was in a session with her and we were talking, and I was telling her all about all of this information I'd uncovered about the insane history of the disease that I'm going to spend the next however many minutes talking to you about. Mid-session, she pointed out to me that I'd clearly done a lot of research and that if I were to share the information I'd learned, then it might end up helping someone. So that is my main reason for making this series of videos. I'm hoping that some of the people who end up watching it feel a lot less alone and a lot more heard and seen. I promise that there is a positive message at the very end of this series that I hope will uplift my fellow patients. You're just going to have to make it through a lot of episodes to get there. I'm so sorry. I'm also making these videos to raise awareness of a very misunderstood disease that I myself have. If you can believe it, we're currently living through a global medical catastrophe. It's just one that most people aren't aware of yet. I think that raising awareness of my illness should honestly be one of the world's top priorities at the moment, and if I've done my job right in making these videos, then you will soon come to understand what makes me say that. In this series, I'm going to be talking to you about ME/CFS. That stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis or myalgic encephalopathy / chronic fatigue syndrome. And clearly, this disease is currently so poorly understood that the world hasn't even decided on a single name for it yet. We're going to talk more in depth about what this disease is in the next few episodes, but for now, I'll just give you the SparkNotes version. ME, which is how I'm going to refer to ME/CFS moving forwards, and we'll get to why later, is a complex neurological disease which affects multiple systems in the body. It affects the immune system, the endocrine system, so hormones, the autonomic nervous system, the cardiopulmonary system, so heart and lungs, and the metabolism. It's really a whole body disease, you could say. There are quite a few symptoms associated with ME, the core ones being debilitating fatigue, unrefreshing or disturbed sleep, cognitive difficulties, also known as brain fog, and something called post-exertion malaise, which you might say is the hallmark symptom of ME. Post-exertion malaise, or PEM, is a worsening of symptoms from between a few hours up to 2 days after any form of exertion, be it physical, cognitive, emotional, etc. With PEM, the increase in symptoms and the time it takes to recover from them are vastly disproportionate to the difficulty of the task in which the energy was expended. For example, a person with ME could do something as simple as wash their hair in the shower, and it could leave them completely bedbound afterwards and needing possibly even a few days of bed rest to recover from. I must emphasize that when it comes to that first symptom of debilitating fatigue, there is nothing like the fatigue you experience when you have this disease. The sensation is incomparable. There is no word in the English language, nor any language that I'm familiar with, that even comes close to describing it. It's not tiredness or exhaustion, or even really fatigue. I have some quotes from some people with ME that I'll read out to you so that you can hopefully get a bit closer to understanding the sheer severity of how this feels. A patient called Sam has told the UK charity Action for ME, "It's like having glandular fever, taking your glandular fever on an all-night drinking binge, then taking your glandular fever and your hangover and doing a 30-kilometre forced march over the Brecon Beacons. The way you would feel at the end of that is how it feels to have ME every day. It's like being on a carousel. You have ups and downs, but you can never get off." That quote was very UK-centric, sorry, so here's another one. In an interview with the New York Times, the ME patient and author Laura Hillenbrand says, "Fatigue is what we experience. but it is what are matches to an atomic bomb. This disease leaves people bedridden. I've gone through phases where I couldn't roll over in bed. I couldn't speak. To have it called fatigue is a gross misnomer. I think that quote describes it pretty well, but I'd like to add one more quote. This is actually a quote from my own personal diary where I wrote a bit trying to articulate how this illness feels for me. Please be kind, once again, this is my personal diary. It is not a sensation of weariness, of too much energy having been spent. It is the absence of any energy to begin with. It feels like antimatter has invaded my body and mind. The vitality that I once cherished has left me. It feels like it was chased away, and in its place there is now nothingness, and the nothingness remains nestled into my muscles and is weighing me down. I can't remember anymore what it's like to feel well. I can only remember that I used to be able to do so much more with my body. I recall this information as you would a scientific fact. The body memory is gone. When I think of how I was before I became unwell, I imagine the strands of my muscles awash with an invigorating, bright yellow light. Now the light is gone, and there is functionless, ugly grey concrete there instead, or just void. The cure for ME is currently non existent. But what is the treatment? That silence is your answer. There is no treatment at all. The only thing that patients can do, and which is what the UK NICE guidelines recommend, is to pace ourselves and practice energy management, which is honestly more of a survival tactic than a real treatment. I heard someone describe it once as budgeting your life, and that is essentially the only option we as patients have, to just endure and wait until the day a treatment becomes available. And that is a pretty rough fate to make peace with, especially for an illness which is so severe that quality of life studies show it leaves patients with, on average, a lower quality of life score than stroke, cancer, multiple sclerosis, or even heart disease. Now, you might be thinking, whoa, an illness as intense and disabling as that, it must be really rare for there to be no cure and not even any treatment for it yet. But it's actually not rare at all. When I was diagnosed a few years ago, there are an estimated 250,000 people in the UK diagnosed with ME, which is around 2 times the number of people diagnosed with MS in this country and over double the number of people who have HIV. In the US, a few years before I was diagnosed, there were an estimated 836,000 to 2.5 million Americans suffering from ME, with a shocking 84 to 91% of patients estimated to be undiagnosed. And that may partly be because there is no diagnostic test for ME yet. People are diagnosed based on symptoms alone, and it's a diagnosis of exclusion, though even among patients like me who were lucky enough to receive a diagnosis, we usually have to wait years before we get one. And when it comes to prognosis, the outlook is bleak. Less than 10% of patients ever go on to make a full recovery. That means that for millions of patients all over the world, we get this disease, we get a diagnosis if we're lucky, and then we're left to suffer with little to no support for the rest of our lives. You might struggle to believe what I'm telling you, but it's all true. There really is a horrifyingly common, massively disabling, not yet understood illness out there, and it affects tens of millions of people all over the world, minimum, myself included. I know it's shocking, but think about it. This wouldn't be the first time in human history that a very common and devastating illness was discovered quite late on. It does happen sometimes. A few more facts about ME before we move on. It's not something you're born with, it's something you develop, usually after a viral infection. For that reason, ME can be understood as a post-viral illness. It's really scary to think about, but ME can happen to anyone at any time, including to children, including to you, though it most often develops between the ages of 10 to 19 or 30 to 39. It's also more common in women than men, and women often suffer worse symptoms than men. As well as that, people of colour are 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from ME, but they're also less likely to be diagnosed with it compared to white people. In the UK, ME is actually the #1 cause of long-term absence from school among children. And ME is, unsurprisingly, very expensive for the economy. For example, it's estimated to cost the US economy between $36 and $51 billion every year. Now that I've got the basic description of the disease out of the way, I'm going to move on to a few disclaimers. Firstly, this is the first time I have ever made a video essay, and I definitely did not ease myself into this genre, especially for someone who has approximately zero experience with video editing or recording of any kind. I chose a very challenging subject to start with, because the title does not lie. I'm confident that this is the biggest medical scandal of the 21st century, and that it's very close to breaking. I would love to speed up that process, so despite my lack of experience, I'm doing this anyway. I promise to try my very best if you promise to ignore how janky these videos will inevitably be. Secondly, I would like to disclose that my only qualifications for talking about ME are that I have the disease in question myself and I have access to the internet to do research. I'm not a journalist, but I can guarantee that I will have made my research as thorough as I'm able to. I am very ill at the moment, but I promise I've tried my best. I'm aware that there's a lot of misinformation about ME floating around, and the last thing I want to do is contribute to that. I know how much harm it does to patients. So the links to all of my sources will be in the description of each video, and I will indicate on screen when I am using whichever source. Thirdly, I am aware that the title of this video is very provocative, but it is not my intention to downplay or ignore the harms done to people through other medical scandals. For any person to suffer harm caused by systemic medical abuse and neglect is one person too many. If you're watching this and you have in any way been affected by a medical scandal, first of all, I'm so sorry. But also, you might find that some of the key people and institutions who are implicated in the scandal that has affected you are also implicated in the scandal that has affected me. And that absolutely must be talked about. Finally, for myself, I'm setting up the expectation that this is not going to be perfect, and that's okay. I'm currently battling a chronic illness while making this, and it's really difficult. But if people only created things and shared them when they felt they were perfect, then I think no one would share anything at all. And plus, for this subject matter, I feel that it's much more important that I get this done and share it with the world than it is for me to make sure it's absolutely perfect beforehand. So, make yourself comfortable, get a drink or a snack if you want, sit back and let me tell you all about how the medical neglect of a little known disease called ME has led to, and I'm not kidding, what is potentially the biggest global mass disabling event since the World Wars.